Welcome back to Hodinkee Radio. I'm editor Tony Trena. Today's episode is coming at you in two parts. In the first part, I asked Ben and Jeff Hilliard, our director of limited editions, to come on to chat about limited editions and Hodinkee's recent collaboration with Porsche Design, a take on the original Chronograph 1. Founded by F.A. Porsche in 1972, Porsche Design has made a number of contributions to watches, which we also talk about. After that, James and Mark join the show. Since we're already halfway through 2024, we decided to do a little recap on the first half of the year, our favorite releases, overlooked watches, and the watches we've been wearing the most. Without further ado, let's get to the show. I wanted to bring on Jeff Hilliard as well as Ben Clymer to talk about limited editions because it's something we haven't done in a while, but obviously is one of the parts of our business that people know best and people continue to look forward to, all of our limited editions. Jeff Hilliard is kind of the one to thank or to blame, perhaps, for all of our limited editions, I would say. Over Jeff, how long have you been here now?
I've been with Hodinkee for 5 years almost, and I've been doing the limited edition projects for 3.5. So most of my time at Hodinkee. And Tony, you sound amazing. I need one of those microphones.
Jeff is generally known as the best dressed man in all of the Hodinkee office, if not all of New York. He's calling in from a Michigan fishing cabin, I suppose, that he must own from something. And then also we've got Ben Clymer, of course, calling in as well. Ben, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Fresh off of it's mid-July at this point, the dog days of summer, but it's a beautiful time in Chicago. So thanks for asking, Ben. I'm feeling good, man.
Good.
I wanted to bring both of you guys on because this is a project that you're both involved in. Ben, as we were just talking about, I think you are going to Tokyo to help with the release of this limited edition Porsche Design collaboration that, Jeff, you've been cooking up for probably going on 2 years at this point. So it's something I thought it was a good opportunity to just bring you on the podcast to talk a little bit more about what goes into some of these releases.
Yeah, Ben is going to be our representative in Tokyo. And like you said, this is something that really we've been working on directly for 2 years, but in a way, Porsche and Porsche Design have been kind of indirectly integrated into Hodinkee for way longer than that. And, Ben, you're really the one that has kind of championed that.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think when we do limited editions, it's all about kind of like teasing out a story that already exists within somebody's history. And, when I think back like the Skipper with Hoyer, nobody was really thinking about vintage Skippers back then, or the 3147 Dado 45. And when I think back to Vacheron, I mean, the Historiques line was basically dead. And the fact that we wanted to do a Lemania-based chronograph in 2017 really kind of like, I don't want to say changed the fortunes, but changed the path of how people viewed that Vacheron line. And I think Porsche Design is often, frankly, misunderstood as almost like a fashion brand, like something that like they think that like Porsche created this stuff to like sell alongside their expensive cars in showrooms, which it's like not at all, right? I mean, this watch, the Chrono 1, was designed by F.A. Porsche, who designed the 904, who, if you're into Porsche, that's like one of the most beautiful, most amazing sports cars in history, but also the 911, right? It's like the idea that the Chronograph 1 was basically the follow-up to F.A. Porsche's work on the 911 is really remarkable. The first watch in black, working with IWC and Orfina and others. The history of the Chronograph 1 is really profound and really deep. And it's long been kind of a favorite of mine and others. Actually, I have a friend up here that collects vintage Porsche Design chronographs because there's so many different variations done for different military units and different driving teams, et cetera, over history. There's so much there, and there's so much fun in this category. And for us, obviously a fan of Porsche, the car company, and Porsche Design, like this is a real design house in a very traditional sense. And the Chrono 1 is really the thing that got the whole thing going.
So for those who don't know the story, F.A. Porsche kind of split off from the family business. 1972 started Porsche Design, and then this was the first thing he designed, right? I mean, this was the first thing to come from his pen for Porsche Design, and then if you like look at the history of watchmaking at Porsche Design after that, you could have a ton of fun just collecting Porsche Design watches if you wanted. There's this watch, the collaboration with Orfina, and then after that, a lot of the IWC stuff that came after that. The first titanium watch, the dive watches, a lot of those for the German military as well are just super cool. But Jeff, I kind of wanted to ask you because, as I said, 1972, which means the 50th anniversary was a couple of years ago. You kind of hinted at the fact that this has been a project for at least a couple of years. So maybe you could just, for those who might want to know more about how this kind of actually works, what a project like this has actually looked like from your perspective on the inside.
Yeah, absolutely. Each limited edition of project is a little bit different. But a lot of times we start with what you might consider as a brief of some sort. There was so much history involved with this with FA Porsche, even with Hodinkee, 911. One of Ben's 911s was featured in volume one of the first Hodinkee magazine. So we had a lot to pull from. Sometimes it's too much. And we always say on the limited edition side, the hardest watches to do are the ones that are already the most well designed. And this kind of fell into that category. So we created a brief to base our design off of. And the brief was really we want to honor Porsche design, we want to honor Porsche, and we want to honor FA's legacy. And the way that we thought about that was okay, what if you took a watch that he designed from 72, 73, you had bought it, you placed it in a drawer and forgot about it for 50 years. And then 50 years later, you open the drawer, maybe it's, your son or a relative, they open it up and they find the watch. What would that watch look like? What kind of tweaks would maybe FA make if he was still around to that design? And that was ultimately kind of how we landed in our design brief is we took a watch that was already incredibly well designed, tweaked it a little bit, put a few Easter eggs in it, which was a lot of fun, and really just kind of showcased what was best from it. So, there's a couple nods to Porsche. There's a couple nods to our history. We have a little nod to our partners in Japan on the day date disc. We have a little nod to Hodinkee at the 6 o'clock sub register. And then we also have a nod kind of to the US market, because obviously that's where our core base is. In the early days when Orfina was making these, as Ben mentioned, there was a million different versions of them. And if you look at them, it's pretty cool to see all the different ones that they made. And one of the slight alterations they made for the US market was the tachometer scale was actually done in miles instead of kilometers. So the version that we made features that little tweak among a few others. So that, kind of pulling it back to your initial question, Tony, it was something that we knew we wanted to kind of put a few core elements in that kind of were referential to original versions and to kind of modern day Easter eggs for Hodinkee.
I mentioned Ben's going to Tokyo, Japan, and then there are some winks or nods to the Japanese market on the watch itself. Is that because there's a specific tie-in with Porsche Design to the Japanese market, or it was an especially important market to the design firm?
Absolutely. And even to this day, I would say, and Ben, feel free to kind of hop in here, but
Sure.
the Porsche community in Japan is incredible. They are incredible at collecting anything. But when it comes to Porsche, they really dig deep. So there's design houses, one that pops to mind is Naito. And they do hardcore restoration of original 911s, all the way through to modern cars. And the culture and the community of the Porsche, of Porsche, Porsche design watches, as well as Porsche cars, is just huge there. And so with our partnership with Hodinkee Japan, with the community that's there, we've always kind of wanted to do an event in Japan, in Tokyo, to kind of celebrate that. And this was effectively the perfect opportunity.
Yeah, I think, I mean, nobody would be surprised to learn that, like, if there's like a number one market for collecting, obscure Porsche design watches and items, it is most certainly Japan. And so that was the thinking in not only creating the product that was kind of Japan centric or a nod to Japan, but doing the launch there. And so, there are people that have, this is not an exaggeration. I've been in touch with somebody that has 500 different Chrono ones, some duplicates of some, obviously, but like that is how deep people go there. And so as Jeff said, there's a lot of little nods, like the H instead of 3H on the 6 o'clock register on the Chrono One, the Japanese date eight, or I'm sorry, date disc, and then the mile marker for US. So it really is in many ways kind of like combining the Hodinkee of the US and Hodinkee Japan, but also catering to, as Jeff said, like what is absolutely the most rampant collector base of Porsche and Porsche design. And historically, we try to do everything. Everything has to have a story. And the first 964, which is an early 90s, late 80s 911 that I owned, was actually a Japanese market car. And the Japanese market 911s are considered like, I don't I wouldn't call them the holy grail, but like there's definitely a certain appeal and charm to Japanese market cars because people in Japan tend to keep them in much better shape than others. You get some really interesting specifications on the cars for the Japanese market. So doing it over in Japan makes a lot of sense. I'm going to be really tired because I'm flying over there, but it's going to be a lot of fun for sure.
And I think you've taken me for a ride in that spec that you had, and it's one of my favorites. The
Yeah,
interior is amazing on that car.
yeah. I mean, look, the cars that were spec for Japan or allocated to Japan always have something interesting, and it's certainly true with Porsche, but not only true with Porsche. Like Mercedes is famous for doing kind of Japanese special car, centric cars. Obviously BMW as well. All the Europeans have always, and Ferrari for that matter. Everyone has understood just how special the Japanese market is from a tastemaking perspective, from a collecting perspective. So it only made sense to go to Japan for our watch launch.
Jeff, in sort of discovering the history of Porsche design watchmaking, which we kind of referenced that at the top here, anything else you kind of learned or really took away at a high level about their importance to Swiss watchmaking over the past 52 years, I suppose it's been now?
Absolutely. It's a good question. A couple of things come to mind. In 2022, when this project was initially being discussed and developed, they being Porsche and Porsche Design invited us to Switzerland, Austria, and Germany, and we got to see everything from their watchmaking facilities in Solothurn all the way through to ZLMC, which is kind of like where Porsche Design was initially started. Once, as you mentioned, FA broke off from the family business, he kind of created a hub in ZLMC, and we got to see the level of watchmaking in Solothurn. It really is kind of an in-house, manufacturer. They have their own movement that will be featured in the watch that we do, cost certified. It's serious. It's a serious design house, and then all the way through to kind of the legacy of FA Porsche Design. We got to see the original, basis for his company. We got to see FA's office, which they've largely kept the same. It's almost like a museum at this point. I think Ben and I and some other colleagues, James Stacey, spent about an hour in there when we initially visited. So it's an incredible place, and you can kind of see the legacy that he's left all the way through to the modern day. Obviously, Porsche Design is not known just for watches. They make incredible products outside of that that are all super well designed. Some ones that I didn't even know about. They had designed a BlackBerry at one point. So the design house and the people that work there, it was a pleasure to get to know them and to get to work with them, because it really was kind of a collaboration, which doesn't always happen with limited editions. We often kind of present our designs and it's either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. This was really a back and forth, and to be able to work with designers that have so much history was a special treat. So
Yeah, and I think also something that I've seen. I have one here, but like there's been such kind of like a refocus on the Chrono One over the past few years through Furry Porsche's Ice Race program, which we've covered on the site a few times in Aspen and in Austria. These watches again offer so much value and history for kind of what they are, and you see so much of like what we kind of think of as like almost an IWC aesthetic, or like a real like traditional like almost Eastern European or Europe, like kind of Central European tool watch theme in these things, and a lot of it comes from Porsche Design. And I think if you look at a lot of the IWCs of the 70s and 80s that most people are into collecting, a lot of them were really derived from Porsche Design concepts. And again, I think that one of the most compelling things for somebody that's interested in design or the history of really anything is, again, just how close this product, and I actually have ours here, how close this product is to the original without being duplicative, without being like completely derivative. And the fact that the heritage of this watch goes back to F.A. Porsche himself. And again, I think like that is, Hodinkee is all about education. Like everything we want to do is to inform, educate, and entertain. And I think this watch, for the lover of Porsche out there, and we know there's a lot of them in our community, this really combines the world of Porsche and Hodinkee in such a neat way. That it's just a really compelling thing. And of course, it's titanium with titanium carbide coating. So it's real black, super light, great bracelet that's very easy to adjust. It's just awesome. It really, really is.
as someone who's been working on these for 3 years and been at Hodinkee for more than 5, as you said, I'd be remiss not to ask Jeff if I could ask what your favorite sort of LEs, if you could choose one or perhaps a few, are.
Yeah, I can't give you just one.
I'll
Everybody
allow a couple.
Okay. Everybody regrets not getting the skipper.
Yeah.
I wore mine this weekend.
There you go.
4th of July. I wear it every 4th of July.
As Ben mentioned, it's the watch of the summer. I think that's
Every
what you
summer,
said in
yeah.
that post.
Every summer.
Yeah. I mean, a longtime favorite has been the Vacheron. Those are 2 watches that Ben just brought up. But I think most recently, if I can pick one from we'll call 'em my era, the era that I've been helping with. Last year we did a limited release with Hublot. I was at a point when limited editions across the industry were kind of at their peak. You started to see maybe some people spend their money a little bit more conservatively. You really had to kind of shock the industry a little bit to make a big kind of, a big push. And I think we did with that one. I love the campaign, but also I wore the prototype for that watch for like 6 months and like actually fell in love with it. And I am not really a Hublot person, but there's something about that watch that is so simple, easy to wear. And it feels like a watch you could wear to everything. So that's kind of my pick.
Yeah. I've been cooking on an early Hublot article for a while, sort of the original MDM watches from the 80s or whenever they came out. Cool watch.
Actually, a little anecdote. When we were working with them on that, the MDM obviously came up, and there's a version of that watch that has 20 screws, or I don't know if it's exactly 20, but it's a lot more than the 8 or so that are on there now, 8 or 10 that are on there now. And we didn't sample it, but we did some pretty high res renderings. And we were close to actually moving a little bit towards the MDM with the multiple screws, but ultimately we thought kind of the not for sale nod was the best thing to go for.
Yeah, totally. Well, it certainly shocked people, I think, a lot. And, all of it was so well done. Ben, we've had this conversation before, but any LEs that Jeff neglected to mention there that you want to give a shout out to? I'm sure they're all so near and dear to your heart.
Many of them are, for sure. I mean, the early ones, because what they meant for me in the business are super, super powerful. The Zenith, I don't know if you guys remember that one. Like that one, like we have a new crown on that. Like we really went to town on that one. That was a cool one. The MB&F, right? The LM101, which was MB&F's first stainless steel watch, the first MB&F to sell above retail ever. Really a great. I have that one. I keep it near and dear. But I no BS. I love this Porsche Design for what it means. I mean, like it is such a cool watch. I own 2 of the kind of more recent Chrono ones in different guises. I've got a vintage one here as well. It's just a great watch to wear, and like you get. Actually, it reminds me a little bit of one of my other favorites, which was our IWC, which is the titanium black case. People love that watch, including myself. This really feels like a sister to that watch. Like it really feels with the titanium matte finish, obviously black, similar kind of Pantone for the lume on it. It really does feel like a companion to that watch, and that feels good because that IWC is absolutely one of our favorites, and still to this day one that people ask for the most.
It's funny you mentioned that because I was wearing the Porsche sample, which was effectively finalized like 2 weeks ago for the entire week. The IWC is a watch that we get requests about very frequently, with people asking if we still have some. Obviously, we don't. It's a number of years ago and was very popular. But I agree. When I put the Porsche Chronograph on, it gave me a very similar vibe, and I expected it to fit the Porsche Design Chronograph. I expected it to fit a little bit bigger, but actually it is super well wearing. The numbers are somewhat deceiving. It wears probably like a straight up 40. It wears like slightly smaller than a sub, actually. So I was pleasantly surprised on how it felt on the wrist.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think this is a really expertly designed case. I mean, I was kind of going back and forth between this and a modern Speedmaster, which of course is 42 millimeters this weekend. Like this is a much more elegant watch on the wrist. And of course, it being black just kind of fades away. But Porsche Design does a lot of really neat stuff that people don't talk about, like the ability to just change out a bracelet like this. It's just amazing. And so you can get kind of creative with other straps, other bracelets. Like I've got this one here. This has kind of like a matte rubber strap on it. You can just pop it right off. Yeah, things like that. Like Porsche Design is always thinking of obviously function and form, but I mean, this really nails it. And again, it's just got some really subtle nods. The Japanese Day disc is just so cool on this one.
Jeff, before I let you go, anything else you want to sort of tease or just stuff you're excited about from the LE side of the house for the rest of the year or the near future more broadly?
Absolutely. Yeah, we are going to have a pretty busy summer into the fall. So, usually the end of the year is where we kind of hold a lot of our premiere releases. This year, it's a little bit different. Porsche is kind of going to kick off a series of releases that we've been working on for a number of years. So, from July through August, September, October, you're going to see watches that we've been working on pretty much since I started doing limited editions. I'm really excited about all of them, but it's really nice to have kind of Porsche Design kick everything off.
In the meantime, go to Hodinkee.com to learn more about the full release from Porsche Design and Hodinkee. It's a limited edition, so make sure to do it relatively quickly as well. And hey, Jeff, perhaps we'll have you on again towards the end of the year with that excellent tease. But thank you so much to Jeff and Ben for joining us, and I'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.
Guys.
You're the best.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Hodinkee Radio. I'm editor Tony Traina. We're already into mid-July, which means we're already halfway through 2024. Watch releases are slowing down a bit for the summer, so I thought it'd be a good time to bring in a few of my fellow editors to talk about the watches we've seen so far this year. Our favorite releases from new brands, overlooked watches, even some of the biggest stories in the industry so far. We're also going to talk about the watches we've worn most. So I've got James Stacey and Mark Kauzlarich here to talk the year in watches 2024 so far. First of all, James, how you doing, my friend?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me on. Always a treat to be here and chat over what's been kind of an interesting year for watches.
Oh, James, I'm just so excited. We're going to get to our things we're excited about in the second half of the year, but I'm excited to see James here at Wind Up Chicago. It'll be in the past tense by the time this airs, but excited to hang out with James nonetheless.
Dinner with Tony. Looking forward to it.
That's right, baby. Next up, we've got calling in from the New York office, Mark. Mark, how are you doing?
Doing great, Tony. Thanks for having me on again.
Oh, my pleasure. So, guys, we're going to talk about some of the releases we've seen, new brands we've seen, overlooked watches of the year, but we're going to do not quite a wrist check, but a 6-month wrist check, if you will. I want to ask both of you guys the watch you've worn most so far in 2024. Mark, maybe we can start it with you.
Yeah, I don't think people will be super surprised. I'm wearing it right now. I think I've said it probably every time we've done a wrist check on the podcast this year, but it's the Pepsi. I mean, I have interesting watches that I like wearing for periods of, a few weeks or something like that, or even a few days. But my watch box right now at home is not placed in a place where I can like easily access it and like open it up and put something else on each day. So when this goes on the wrist, it goes on my bedside table. The next morning I put it back on, and that's always it.
I could have probably penciled this in already. No surprise, but we love to hear it nonetheless. I have a friend, Nick, who runs Ad Patina here in Chicago. He does a thing where he wears a watch for 1 month at a time. Shout out to Nick, I suppose. But I've always thought that was kind of a charming idea. And, look, Rolex GMT Pepsi is as good a watch as any to do that with. James, watch you've worn the most so far in 2024.
It's kind of tough. I mean, like I think it's probably like a 2 or a 3-way tie. I'm pretty much down to 3 watches these days that I wear like with extreme frequency, and the Pelagos 39 I adore. Our Longines Spirit Zulu Time, the Hodinkee LE. I just when I want something that's not necessarily a dive watch when I'm traveling, that sort of thing, it's just perfect and super lightweight and easy to use, and I think it looks amazing. And then finally, what I've got on today, which is just the JP 2007 edition of the Aqualand, the Citizen Aqualand with the lume dial. There's pretty much the 3 that I wear most frequently. They're always in some state of changing a bracelet or a strap or something like that. But especially in the summer, I like a watch that I can just kind of put on and do whatever I'm going to do without really being too worried about it.
You guys are nothing if not predictable, and I am about to join it and make it a threesome of predictability because the watch I've worn the most so far is my Black Bay 58. It's a sort of a special or limited edition, I suppose, for a retailer here in the States. But I got the watch probably a year and a half ago now. I've been wearing it on a Tropic strap all summer. It's the most boring watch in the world, but I've owned a number of them since 2018, as I've probably talked about here. But it tends to be the watch I reach for, especially during the summer. There are a couple others here I've got on the desk in rotation. Not the most recent Merci we did, but the first one we did a few years ago. When I need to dress up,
Oh, those are nice.
I wore this to a wedding actually a few weeks ago. It's a nice watch. Got it on a leather strap, put it on a bracelet a lot. This is a kind of an overlooked release if we're going to preempt the question a little bit, but the 50th anniversary Casiotron, like kind of a reissue of the original Casiotron, is cool. $500. It was a little overpriced, but it's a cool watch nonetheless. I've been wearing that a lot too when I just want a non-mechanical or digital watch that I don't want to think about much. So those are the
For
watches
sure.
kind of in the rotation, but it's always the Black Bay 58 for me. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Tudor when we get to favorite releases of the year so far, but
The 58 on a Tropic is so good.
it's the best, James. Look,
Really nice way to summer that watch.
I have issues with the original. I have the original 58 that's been out since 2018. I don't have issues with the rivet bracelet. But I just, especially during the summer, kind of wish I had a T-fit to be able to on the fly adjust it basically. And the bracelet's a little heavy and these types of things. I looked into kind of getting I think what you can do is go in and buy a bracelet, just a bracelet that has T-fit, but it's like $1,000. I wasn't ready to just spend $1,000 on a bracelet. So Tropic strap for the summer for me on the 58. So we're going to talk about some of the favorite releases we've seen so far in 2024. We're going to start with our best or favorite watches we've seen. So just to set it up for a second as a reminder for those who may not follow along too closely, the main release event of the year so far was Watches and Wonders back in April. You may remember some of the shows we did around it. That's when we saw releases from Patek, Rolex, Cartier, dozens of other brands in and around the show. We've talked about this a little bit. We talked about it at the time. The general sentiment seemed to be that releases for the year were more tame or conservative than in years past, especially 2023. But I think we've still found some stuff to get excited about. And as I think I'm going to talk about a little bit, there are watches that I've thought about more and more since then that didn't necessarily grab headlines at the time, but I am increasingly excited about them as I see them again and again. And I've seen people buy them, or I've seen them in the market, as it were. So as we're going to get to, we're going to talk about these in two categories. I asked you guys to bring two watches or two sets of watches of your favorite new releases. First of all, I define it roughly as the under $10,000 category. So more run-of-the-mill commercial watches. And then after we talk about those, we're going to talk about just the high-end crazy watches we've seen, the ultra-thin, record-setting whatevers, things that we saw at the show that grabbed headlines that honestly we might never see again in the wild, but are crazy pieces of often complicated watchmaking. So James, let's kick it off with you maybe and talk about maybe your favorite, maybe there's a few you want to mention, but your favorite watches under the sort of $10,000 category you've seen so far this year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my bread and butter has always been like more like under five is a nice comfort zone. And I think we're entering a world where, especially after the last several years, we're seeing a lot more price sensitivity. So I'm going to even go less than 10 grand. And the two watches I'm most excited about, I've actually bought both. The first one I'll say is the Doxa Sub 200T, which I've talked about on other Hodinkee radio podcasts. I just think the idea that you can get into a smaller, more easily worn, but still with, there's 13 or 14 different colors of an iconic dive watch for $1,200 when a lot of its kind of historical brethren would cost multiples of that, if not more, and might even be less fun. But yeah, the Doxa Sub 200T is probably among my favorite watches released this year at any price point, but at, under $1,500 on your wrist. It's not every day that we see Seiko and Doxa kind of sitting in a very similar price point. And I just think it makes the Doxa super competitive at that price point, because we're so used to seeing, a 300 thin case for $2,500, $2,600, which I think can be a bit of a hurdle for folks, understandably. That's a lot of money, especially if you can now in the States. It's nice. You can walk into a store and actually see a Doxa, but in the past you had to just buy it online and hope that it worked out. And now to have it in the 39 millimeter case and, like I said, tons of different colors, I think it's an absolute winner for sure.
James, do you think that is a good entry point into Doxa? Because we were sort of debating that very topic last night. There was a bunch of watch folks in town from across the country, and I met up with some, and Doxa was a big point of conversation. And I'm still trying to figure out what my first Doxa should be, or I think I know, but I second guess every time.
Yeah, I think if you want to hit the core, it's always going to be a 300, and I mean a 300, not a 300T, simply because the 300 does wear, in my opinion, significantly better. being a little bit thinner and having more of the vintage style rather than the more modern Doxa take. But at 42.5, while I would say that it's a watch that wears much smaller than that, much smaller than you'd expect, for being, roughly on the larger size of a mid-sized watch these days. I do think the 200T, when you consider both the 39 millimeter case sizing and the massive reduction in upfront price, and otherwise no real loss. You can still get the color you want if you want your first Doxa to be a Pro, which is the orange dial. I think that's a great option. They all look really good. I'm a big fan. I went with yellow. It's one I haven't owned yet. It's called Diving Star. If you don't know your Doxa color names, but I haven't owned. I have a Sea Rambler 300, which I adore and wear a ton, and I've owned a Pro. And so it really came down to the Caribbean, which is the blue orange, great colorway, of course. But I wanted to try and push myself a little bit outside my comfort zone, and so I went with the Diving Star. But I right now I would suggest you pick up a 200T because you just significantly drop your how the stakes of the game. It's just a much more reasonably priced watch, and I think it's very similar, if not exceedingly similar, in terms of the experience of wearing a 300 as well, a thin case.
I love
So yeah, really long answer for yes.
I love Doxa naming conventions. There will be a quiz at the end. I think you got all the color names.
I think
there
I've got the colors locked in. I think I'm pretty good on that.
You certainly do. I don't, but I think you mentioned all of them. Mark, favorite release of the year under 10 grand or so?
Okay, so I originally put down the SLGW 003 from Grand Seiko. It's their manual wind titanium. I think it's brilliant hard titanium is the material, and it's only found otherwise in the Grand Seiko Kodo. But the manual wind sort of dress watch thing is something that I don't really have in my collection right now. So this is actually one that I've thought very seriously about picking up myself. And I actually was at Grand Seiko's boutique in New York maybe last week or 2 weeks ago, and they did a demonstration of actually putting together the movement. They had a watchmaker come from Japan and put the movement together in front of everybody. And it was impressive to see this guy do this in like 23 minutes or something like that. But the movement is designed in a way that specifically they wanted that tactile feeling of the click when you're winding to be really, really strong, which is just a fun little addition. But otherwise, it's a great option. The only problem is when I wrote that down, I actually thought it was sub 10,000 and it's actually 10,700. So I'm going to hedge and also mention a watch that I did for my first week on the wrist, which was the white dial Speedmaster, the new white lacquer dial Omega Speedmaster Professional Moon Watch, or whatever order those words go in appropriately for Omega. But that's another one that I put my name down on a list at an AD to try to get that. And originally they said it could be up to 2 years. They just don't know when these watches are going to come in, but he said they actually accepted the purchase order for the watch from Omega. So hopefully at some point soon, I'll be able to pick that one up.
Yeah, I've seen a number of those in the wild since they were released earlier this year and then teased with the whole Daniel Craig thing late last year. It's cool that they're kind of making their way into the world relatively quickly. But I mean, is there any, you did that week on the wrist a couple of weeks ago. Anything else to say about that watch before we close on the Speedmaster? I mean, there's kind of everything and nothing to say about a white dial Speedmaster. It's just like one of the best watches ever. And, this is a great addition to the collection, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I still go back and forth on the whole debate in the story, which was, should your first Speedmaster be a black dial, if that's sort of the heritage going back to the Moonwatch thing. And I still am not exactly sure. Like, I guess I'll have to make a decision if a watch comes in for me and I have to put down the money. I'll have to finally make a decision about it. But I think it was just really, really fun. I don't know any other way to put it. Like, it's just a fun watch, and it's a watch that got me thinking about Speedmasters for the first time in probably 5 years. It's not something that I've ever seriously considered before. So I think that alone is a success, and I don't know. I was expecting more people to have sort of negative feelings towards messing with the Speedmaster in that way. Like putting a white lacquer dial on a Speedmaster is honestly pretty big for just a dial swap. But I've been surprised how many people have liked it. I've been surprised to hear how many people have like put their name down or been able to get one, which I'm happy that they are coming in. But it's just a fun watch.
Yeah,
I
there'd
think
be
it looks
stronger
incredible.
opinions. Yeah. There'd be stronger opinions if it weren't so freaking good, honestly. But it's just a great watch. And it's cool to see after a couple of years of Moonswatch, this is kind of one of the first big stainless steel Speedmasters we've seen. And this is the way they're capitalizing on Moonswatch momentum, perhaps in a way, with just a great release. So can't knock either pick there. The one that I was going to talk about for just a second, guys, is it's not going to shock anyone here, but it's the Tudor Black Bay 58 GMT. At the
It's a goodie.
time, yeah, we talked about it when it was released back in April at Watches and Wonders. I think a lot of people had strong feelings about the rich sort of gilt bezel, black and burgundy, basically. It didn't strike me one way or another, but I've seen it a few times since then. And then I was in London a few weeks ago, swung by Bonhams, and they had a Rolex GMT 6542 there as well. And that was the first time I kind of thought to myself, I kind of do like what Tudor's doing with the Black Bay GMT 58 bezel. And also, it's always with Tudor. If you don't like the color that they're releasing now, have no fear, because in 6 months they'll have the one you want, or in another 6 months they'll have the one you want. But beyond that, I think it's since 2018. I mean, I talked about my Black Bay 58 at the top when they released the GMT alongside that. We've been waiting for them to cross pollinate these two watches, and it finally came. And it's the exact dimensions we wanted: 39 millimeters and 12.8 thick, and it's still $4,600. So well under the $10,000 mark arbitrarily set for ourselves. But it's a watch I've been thinking about a lot, that I just feel as though it people obviously took note of it when it was released, but since then I've gained an increased appreciation for it, especially seeing it a few more times outside the shock and fluorescently lit halls of Watches and Wonders.
I think it's just really good product. Like the coloring, like now we're really getting into the weeds. Like I get if that's enough to like delineate. It is for me. I would be more interested in one that has the coloring of the monochrome or just no gilt or whatever. But it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with that watch. It's just Tudor likes to do this where they release one and people kind of get into a frenzy for a while, and then eventually we see some more, like you mentioned. I would be fascinated to see them put this movement and employ this movement in more watches, especially stuff in the Pelagos range. I think a Pelagos GMT still remains a very like appealing idea to me, despite the fact that it would be a very complicated thing, because I just simply adore my standard 39. It's, in my mind, it's about as good a sport watch as is available on the market right now in terms of what you get for the value and for the watch enthusiasm aspect and the rest of it. The one thing that I did want to point out, or the one thing that I did want to say while we were talking about watches that were well under the $10,000 budget, is a watch that came out yesterday. I bought it immediately. It's I think it's still available on the pre-order price, which is like $260, and that's this Momentum Eclipse Solar UDT. So Momentum is a watch brand under the St. Moritz umbrella, and their previous owner, or their current owner, previously owned Chronosport. And the Chronosport UDT is a watch that I really adore. It has a really cool background, both in pop culture and in the special forces, and it's really just a cool design to begin with. I remain in the niche of really loving analog digital watches. I'm wearing an Aqualand now. I find them endlessly charming and kind of geeky. It makes me feel like a kid getting my first Swiss Army knife. It's just all this functionality. They're almost always great. Not always, but generally they're really good examples of the idea of function before form design. And with the original UDT, especially the UDT2, it was really just a fantastic looking watch. I own a Breitling Pluton, which is actually in some ways a cheaper way of getting into the UDT world, because classic, good condition, well-running UDTs are quite expensive for quartz watches. And then yesterday, Momentum finally took the wraps off of the new UDT, and it uses a Seiko sourced, like an Epson movement. It's solar. It has 200 meters of water resistance and screw-down crowns and a ceramic bezel. It's still 42 millimeters and pretty thin. And I think for the price, as long as you're the right type of nerd, like if you're in my nerd camp, I guess, or if I'm in your nerd camp, however you want to describe it, I think this is a genuinely compelling watch, and for me, it's currently probably budget watch of the year. To be fair, I want to make it clear that I have not held this watch, but on paper. It was good enough for me to buy one immediately, and I'm definitely excited to get my hands on it and give it a try. I think that'll be more like September. So if you're waiting for the story, apologies, you'll be waiting a little while. And I don't know what the actual ship date is on those ones, but maybe I can get a press loaner beforehand. But I'm pumped for that one, and I hope it's successful because then they'll make more versions. And I think a watch like that could be a lot of fun with some color.
Guys, we kind of talked about the real budget end there, but before we move on to the most overlooked watches, are there any just super high-end, crazy, complicated, whatever it is, independent watchmaking, large brand watches that have really stood out to you this year?
I mean, for me, the hardest my jaw dropped so far in 2024 was that Bulgari Octo Finissimo Ultra. It's like 1.7 millimeters thick, and it still looks like an Octo. Like they still managed to make it feel like it's part of that lineup. It's 0.05 of a millimeter thinner than the Richard Mille, but I think what's more notable is the Richard Mille doesn't really look like a watch, and two, doesn't really look like a Richard Mille either. Kind of looks like a Ferrari credit card. And then the Octo, like if you put that next to any other Octo, which they're all pretty special watches in my opinion, but this thing's flat out insane. It's this ridiculously thin watch with a ton of really interesting engineering and this really incredible box that it comes with that can control the watch to some extent and that sort of thing. I highly recommend checking out the story on Hodinkee. We'll have it in the show notes, of course. But that was, I think I said this on when we were doing the Lucid podcast from Geneva. It's like physically holding a magic trick. I still have no clue how it happened. I held it physically in my hands. It's absolutely crazy. It's such a cool experience. I'm not saying I want to buy one or that you should go out and spend your $600,000 or whatever they cost for something like that. But if you get a chance to go to a store and they have one and you can even just see it in profile, let alone try and put it on your own wrist or whatever, like even the clasp is probably more impressive than any watch I've ever owned. Like the clasp on the bracelet. It's just this like genuinely incredible piece of like engineering and design and art all wrapped up. It's like what I want from high-end watchmaking, even if I'm never going to like personally be able to buy it or would probably buy it even if I could. Like I just love that it exists. It feels like something you should see in a museum.
It's a watch I haven't seen, just appointments or schedules didn't work out or whatever it was. But I've got to say, James, your way with words describing it as a magic trick on the wrist or whatever you said makes me feel like I was there. So that's good enough for me. Mark, high-end watch for you that's most stood out this year.
Yeah, I haven't seen that watch either. I actually am hoping to see it during Geneva Watch Days. It's something that I've told them I would love to have a chance to take a look at. I think this sort of might be cheating because both of these watches are versions of things that sort of already exist. But the two that jumped out to me were the Audemars Piguet John Mayer Royal Oak Perpetual Calendar for a couple reasons, and I think it's no shock to people that I picked up a guitar when I was a kid, largely because of James Taylor and John Mayer. So I've got a soft spot there for that. And then I got back into watches thanks to Hodinkee and Ben and their talking watches with John Mayer. And so it was a pretty cool experience to be able to be there when that watch was unveiled. But I think, look, it's the swan song for the 2120 2800 movement series of calibers that have powered the APQPs for decades now, in different variations. And so it's the last one that they're going to do. The dial is phenomenal. That crystal sky dial is pretty cool. And I'm hoping that, maybe it'll show up in some more releases in the future. So that was a big one for me, just because I think it's such a great watch. And then the other one was the Datograph Perpetual Tourbillon Honey Gold Lumen ridiculousness that Lana put out earlier this year. What was the price? Something like $650,000, which
it was a big number.
Yeah, it was something that just like you just kind of had to laugh. And then I don't even remember how many they were making, like 50 or something like that, 50 or 100, and
Like at a
whatever
certain
the
point let's say it was $650,000. At this point, you don't even have to tell me the currency. It's too many digits
yeah.
for your boy. Just say it's a lot, and we'll move on, and I can just enjoy the watch.
James, you'd be doing, you've got some yen in your pocket though, James. Don't sell yourself short. Come on now, man.
I could throw a few yen around for sure. It's currently a little weak, but let's not be unfair. Canada's dollar's heading that direction as well.
I mean, this is the thing, like, I can't with a straight face really, like, look at anybody whenever reviewing a watch like this and tell you that I am, like, trying to give you a sense of the value of this watch compared to other things on the market. Like, I don't think that people that are buying that watch are really thinking about it that way at all. And so, I'm never gonna afford something like this, and I have no frame of reference for, like, saying I'm gonna throw down that much money for a watch. But it's absolutely incredible. And, like, it was just I got to photograph it twice, I think, and spend probably a total of 2 hours with that watch, which is, probably the most I'll ever see that watch ever again in my lifetime. But, yeah, it's incredible, and it's, like, the peak of everything that you would want from a Lama. So, it has to be on the list, I think.
So, guys, that's enough of the high end stuff. We've got one more category, I think, to talk about as far as our favorite watches. We're going to talk about the most overlooked watches. So, maybe this is a watch from a small brand. We've kind of talked about some of these smaller or more under the radar brands already. Or maybe it's from a bigger brand and you feel like the watch was just kind of overshadowed by a bigger or splashier release. But the most overlooked watch of the year so far. James, I'm going to kick it back to you. I'm sure you've got all kinds of overlooked watches that you want to give a little bit of shine to. So give us a few.
Yeah, I do have a few, like a stack. Some of it's just stuff that like I didn't get to see at Watches and Wonders, or we didn't get to see. So like the first one that immediately came to my mind, because I caught up with this watch like the week after Watches and Wonders, I look back and I go, oh wait, the dial's not even showing the time. How does this watch work? And it's this dive track from Singer watches. So Singer's a car brand that, quote unquote, reimagines 911s. And they entered into the watch world several years ago with the Track 1, and which uses this fabulous movement, and they designed the case and the dial and the rest of it. And then now they have this dive track, which is a crazy high-end dive watch that I don't know that anyone will ever necessarily take diving. But it has essentially a 24-hour chronograph, and then the time is read from this crazy aperture on the side of the case, like the active time of day is read from a sort of peripheral view on the side of the case. It's just a cool thing. This reminds me of like Blancpain with the 50 Fathoms X, where you get something that's kind of just made because they could make it and because somebody had an idea. This feels like something that somebody, a great designer, kind of drew and then said, I wonder if this is even possible. It almost feels a little bit like a sports watch crossed with something from MB&F, all at the same time while still feeling kind of singery. If you happen to have missed this one, which I definitely did, and I desperately hope to see one in the future, I highly recommend checking out. Again, hit the show notes for it. But I think this is a very cool watch. I guarantee it's got a big price tag, but I'm not looking to take one of my own diving or something like that. I just like to appreciate it. And I think it's a pretty cool thing. And I kind of like that Singer's sticking to the watch thing and now expanding beyond sort of automotive adjacent or even watches that are designed to complement specifically their cars. And this feels like more of a standalone product that almost feels like it would sit in the same space as Resence and Urwerk and MB&F and all of that kind of thing at the same time, although still being a pretty like grounded sort of industrial design.
This is the first time I've spent more than a couple of minutes thinking about this watch. And this is proof that sometimes if you see a wild thing, maybe take a second longer just to figure out what the hell this thing is all about. Because this is a wild watch. And look, I started the show by talking about how things felt relatively tame or conservative this year, but Singer Reimagined has kicked the door down on that theory because this watch is absolutely ridiculous. And James, thank you for highlighting it. This thing is awesome.
Yeah, I slept on it. Maybe our great audience didn't, but I did, so that's why I'm bringing it up. I'm going to try and put it out in the world just in case anybody else missed it. I think it's just a unique and very cool thing.
Mark, most slept on watch for you of the year so far?
I mean, I wouldn't say that this is something that probably the world slept on, but I certainly overlooked, which was the Black Bay chronograph with the pink dial was something that I completely overlooked. I thought it was sort of just very niche, maybe even a little kitschy with the Inter Miami tie-in and this pink dial situation from Tudor. And I guess I overlooked it because apparently the prices for these things on the secondary market are absolutely wild. I think, 15 plus $1,000 for a Tudor chronograph is pretty crazy. I only know of one other chronograph from them that trades above that, which is a limited edition with Eastern Arabic numerals that was done for our friends in Dubai. But yeah, I didn't get it. I still don't know that I completely get it. I kind of want to because I kind of wanted to see if I can try to get one and have this thing that's apparently going to be very limited production, and that's part of why it's hard to get and the prices have gone up. But people seem to either really dig it or see that it might have some value in the future, and that's why the prices are so ridiculous. But I definitely overlooked it, and maybe you guys can help fill me in on what I'm missing here, but I I'm still not sure.
It's cool to see Tudor, first of all, doing more of these collaborations with their sports sponsors. We just saw the blue ceramic Black Bay, which kind of is an extension of what we saw them doing with Formula One, or what they have just started doing with Formula One, really. But yeah, it's hard to divorce a watch like this from what we're seeing it sell for in the secondary market. I saw one sell on eBay for something like 16 grand a week or two ago. At the same time,
Good for
though,
them.
yeah, good for someone, I suppose.
Sure.
At the same time, I have seen private collectors, folks on Instagram that feel like sort of real enthusiasts, whatever that even means, I suppose, getting these watches, posting about them. I've seen this, multiple times. So it is cool that real people seem to be getting them more than just the David Beckhams and the James would know better than me, but the F1 drivers that race on Tudor's team
Sure.
are
Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo.
Hey, how'd they do in Silverstone last week?
Not amazing, but not terribly. I mean, Ricardo's not really holding up his end of the deal necessarily on most races, but they're still occasionally into the points. It was a better weekend for some of the other teams, and certainly a great weekend for the UK drivers.
Okay. Hey, did Lewis Hamilton win?
He did.
Whoa, I had no idea. Congratulations, Lewis. Sort of a swan
Yeah.
song going out with
Big win for sure.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
Hey, anything to say about Tudor though on this subject, or you just want to keep talking F1?
No, I don't think our audience necessarily wants us to expound on Formula One any more than is necessary. I like the blue watch quite a bit. I like that they're continuing the ceramic and the metas and the rest of it. I would love to see them do 58 ceramic. I think that would really blow people up. I think people would go nuts for that. I think that'd be just an exciting watch to see. But the retail version of their V-Carb watch, that's the team that they're aligned with, the Visa Cash App Red Bull team, is an interesting thing. It's cool. As for the pink dial chronograph, I think that it's neat to see that because Tudor really does a good job of aligning with the current perspective of enthusiasm in watches, or at least they're within a close time frame. Sometimes you have to wait a year or two for the exact 58 that you wanted or whatever. But for the most part, they're making watches for watch enthusiasts who have experienced other brands and all that kind of stuff. And when the brand does decide to play around with that formula, whether it's for V-Carb, they also did like a chameleon dial, which links up with a certain credit card that Visa offers, like with this kind of color changing finish. They did that for the Miami Grand Prix. And I think when they kind of break format and play with some color or play with the case material or something like that, it's quite exciting. And I think that's why we're seeing that in the price point, is they've kind of nailed the conventional watch offering. And then when they kind of, just play around with their formulas, I think they occasionally come across things that get people pretty excited. And I guess that's where this pink chrono kind of falls.
James, you had one more watch on your potentially overlooked watches list that I wrote about towards the beginning of the year. There's an expansion to the collection coming, and it comes from an unexpected source, Raymond Weil, and do you want to help me with the French pronunciation there?
I'm actually, I looked at this word several different times, so there's no way I'm going to pronounce it correctly. It's either French or Italian, millesime maybe, or millesime. I'm not
I
sure.
think it's French. I believe it to be French for vintage. I believe this is what they
Okay.
told me. But I'm wondering why you decided to
I think it's a
add
good-looking
this
watch.
to the list. It is. Yes.
One, I think this is a brand that doesn't typically enter into the enthusiast conversation all that often. I think that they try, they make a conventionally strong product. There's nothing wrong with the quality of the watches or anything like that. It's just that, sometimes brands are part of the sort of meta of watch enthusiasm and sometimes they're not. And I think this is probably the strongest offering that they've made into a really handsome, good-looking watch that carries the brand in a direction that I would support for sure. So I wanted to highlight it simply because I don't think it's a brand that comes up that often on a Hodinkee radio or otherwise, and it's not a brand I spend a ton of time paying attention to. But the sort of JLC Patek vibe that they've wrapped into this, and the case looks quite lovely. The dial looks good. I think maybe the hour hand is a little long. If I was getting, like, how picky do you want me to be? I think this is a good watch and that they did a nice job with it. And it's one I would love to see like in person and try on my wrist. It's just a handsome, kind of good looking thing.
Yeah. So they won a GPHG award for the under $2,000,
did.
$30,000 price point last year, whatever it is. And that was what put it on my radar. I called this watch in it's a white dial, basically a sector dial, millesime, as you so brilliantly put it, James. And they're actually expanding the collection later this year. James, you'll be happy to see
Nice.
I've got 3 Raymond Weil boxes right here on my desk
look at
right
that.
now. So they're really dedicated to expanding the line. This sort of, I think they know they've kind of hit on something for enthusiasts like us. So I think it deserves to be recognized. I was glad you kind of called it out, and expect to see more from them on this front
great. That's awesome.
in September. More sizes, complications. I think they've realized that they've hit on something and they've kept it at a good price. They're using Solita movements, so things are, this sector dial watch, the time only one, is about $1,500.
Yeah, it's just under $2,000.
Yeah,
just under 40 millimeters.
Yep.
I think this is a thing where, we see a lot of this aesthetic in like Longines. It's like among their core is taking something quite elegant and wearable and nicely sized and quite subtle on your wrist. You wear it and you just kind of forget it's there until you glance down at it. Like Longines is really good at that. And I think this kind of takes that format and still kind of feels like it has a sporty feel to it, that sort of Calatrava adjacent sort of very mid-century take on something that's dressy, but I think you could wear pretty much any time. So yeah, I don't want a brand like Raymond Weil to not get the shine that they deserve when they do something that I think enthusiasts could get excited about.
With that, James, Mark, thanks for joining me to talk about some of our favorite stuff from the first half of 2024. Thank you all for listening. Thanks, of course, to Vic Ottamanelli for the help with the editing, and we'll see you all again next week.